In the next section, I'll go into a little more detail about what it's like for dads in maternity care. Currently, men are making this is essentially just a bit of an analogy with family life. So at the moment, men are making, this is their current contribution. It's just the tip of the iceberg. But over time, I believe that we can actually begin to make a much greater contribution during the perinatal period, which will actually flow on to the later time for that family going forward. And fatherhood is a place now where the traditional masculine kind of stoic, strong, and that attitude of perhaps toxic masculinity is no longer kind of seen as appropriate for fathers. And I think that fathers get a real free kick when it comes to these kind of aspects of masculinity. We're allowed to be nurturing and loving to our children, which is beautiful. And I think that this involved fatherhood that we're seeing and trying to improve their connection to the perinatal period will actually improve the masculinity that many men present with. And I think, it wasn't so long ago that we were operating at tribal kind of Neanderthal type of masculinity. And now we find ourselves in this competitive, toxic kind of world. But there's a window to what's possible when it comes to fatherhood. And maybe that's going to lead to, a more widely accepted version of masculinity, which is the emotional, healthy, masculine archetype. Now, let's ask ourselves the question, why support dads? What's the benefit? And if you'd like to pause, maybe pause this right now and consider that question. Well, supporting dads supports families. If you can support the supporter, then they're going to be much more able to support themselves and their families. And therefore, it improves family well-being. And as I mentioned previously, it has actually the potential to positively impact the fabric of the entire society. Because if we can get dads in this space of nurturing, involved fatherhood, they will bring that kind of attitude and that kind of energy to the rest of their lives as well. So it's a positive impact for children. It's well researched that children who have an involved father have better mental and physical health. They're better at school, cognitively, they're better at social aspects of their personality, higher self-esteem, fewer behavioral problems. It's all good news when involved fathers are around, and there's lower risky behavior, such as maybe drug taking or substance abuse, and risky behavior like accidents and underage sex and things like that. But it's not only good for the kids, it's good for the dads. It's actually good for men to be more involved in their children's lives, because there is an incredible list of wonderful things that come from actually being a better dad. And of course, let's not forget that involving men in maternity care is really, really positive. And Family Included is a research symposium, research consortium that actually has a lot of research that is about fathers and the way that they show up in maternity care and how important they can be. And of course, the active engagement of fathers, it shows long-term benefits for the whole family. There's no doubt about it. And they're in the frame when it comes to postpartum depression, any kind of birth trauma aspects. If there's any unfortunate things like postpartum psychosis and these mental health issues, dads are the ones who are in the front line. They're the first one to be able to triage that situation. So if we can, like I say, support them, they're much more able to be more supportive of those around them. particularly the mother of their child and their child. So what does the current engagement of dads look like? Perhaps pause here again and ask yourself what that might look like. So the current engagement, there was recently a study released in 2020. It was undertaken by Healthy Male, a non-profit located here in Australia, on behalf of the Australian Department of Health. And they interviewed 367 men, 159 health professionals from a range of disciplines. And they asked them about different aspects of the reproductive health system. And here's a few of the outcomes. So it's been largely overlooked. In general, this is one of the conclusions they made, and that structural changes are needed to the reproductive health system in order to meet the modern demands of fathers and governments. And we're just actually, what this study found was that we're just not keeping pace, with how fathers really want to be treated and how they, in a sense, should be treated in the reproductive health system. So I'd like you to take a moment to just have a think about what this chart says to us. So overall, what's the engagement of dads like on the pathway to fatherhood? So that is antenatal. Antenatal, kind of, how are they treated by our reproductive health system? So what can you conclude from this? Well, I would say that if you have a look at these markers here and you added all that up, you could say that 50% of men rated the reproductive health system in regards to how they were treated as 6 and above. Then when we look over here, these are the health professional markers, and the health professionals rated it as 3 or less. So what does this actually say? I conclude from this that men do not really associate themselves with being worthy of assistance or of being, looked after or engaged in reproductive health. But we all know the outcomes would be much better if they are. And I think that's where we see the health professionals' attitude towards it. They can see, well, if we treated dads a little better, they can see that there's actually gaps in their own practice, or that they could be doing a lot better. So that was a very interesting chart for me from Healthy Male, from the plus paternal process. Another few things that came out of that. So 2/3 of dads, between half and 2/3 didn't really feel engaged or supported. But there was a positive kind of attitude in this, in that we are starting to think about looking at doing this, which is a good outcome. But then sometimes when men attended antenatal education or even their antenatal appointments, ultrasounds, these things, they're not really engaged, acknowledged. They're often invisible. And just a few comments there from a few of the people who interviewed. There's so much to be done with supporting the women, and I totally understand that. And I guess what a lot of my work is about with regards to these kind of presentations is just trying to say, maybe dads can actually help. We can get dads engaged so that they can actually help us in the health environment, so that they can actually start to be more helpful than they have been previously. So let's have a look at just a couple of good papers that I've come across with regards to this, and these are really good papers to get a perspective of how dads are feeling in this perinatal time. So the male perinatal experience the worldwide research shows that, I mean, these words here have been directly lifted from studies that I've read. And what we know about all the way that men are is that we tend to bottle these things up, unfortunately. They come through the antenatal time and they come out the other side. And this is often the way that men are feeling. Now, they bring this into our society, essentially, because if you bottle those feelings up and there's nowhere for them to essentially process this, I mean, it's not like men have many avenues of talking about childbirth, talking about their experience of pregnancy, talking about what it's like when their partner has postnatal depression. It's something that is kind of bottled up, kept inside, and this turns into unfortunate kind of expressions, and that, you know, it leads to perinatal confusion, because on the one hand, our society is saying, hey guys, we want you to be connected to your heart. We want you to be able to share your emotional landscape and you know, be more heart connected. Whereas when it comes to something like childbirth, you know, supporting childbirth and those early days of fatherhood and motherhood, they're actually quite, you know, they're quite risky for people's mental health. But dads have to suck it up. We're just meant to be the rock, and that's fine, but that represents a fundamental hypocrisy, because, I mean, even a rock crumbles, but on the one hand, we're saying, hey, we want you to be heart connected. And on the other hand, we're saying, no, hang on a second. But when it comes to childbirth, when you should be nurturing and tender and loving, you just have to hold all of those negative feelings or negative things that have happened to you and just suck it up. And of course, during the antenatal period, men are often told just how important they are. But then when they get into the hospital system, unfortunately, they often experience the opposite. And that, you know, that invisibility and being overlooked and devalued is a common occurrence. And so in conclusion, I would say that the system of care doesn't intentionally, it unwittingly harms fathers, some fathers, not everyone. But so, you know, fathers come out the other side kind of with a negative connotation of how the system may have failed them. And that's unfortunate. And sometimes it actually cascades into other areas of our social fabric. You know, there's mental health issues for dads. There is risk of suicide, which is higher than at any other time in his life. Relationship breakdown occurs. There's isolation for first-time and new dads, and some people turn to substances and maybe risky behaviour. And then, of course, there is domestic and family violence, which is higher during the perinatal time, which is really unfortunate kind of impacts of what I see is the neglect. Neglect is a strong word, but the kind of neglect of fathers in the perinatal reproductive health system. So when we go into fatherhood, dads transition in silence. They do not really talk much about childbirth. There's no wisdom transferred about what it's like to look after a brand new baby, a little newborn. I think some of that stuff is starting, but you have to be a lucky guy who's got other friends who are right in the thick of it, who, you know, are willing to talk about it. I think if there's two men and they're in a room and they've both got babies, they're going to be talking about it. But in general, men don't spark up conversations about childbirth, about early parenting, those kind of things. And therefore, we kind of parent in silos, where we have similar issues like any other parent, but we kind of think that it's a personal thing, that it's only us that has this problem with our toddler. And we might blame the toddler, we might blame ourselves, we might blame our partner, but we rarely reach out and kind of say, ask questions, those kind of questions, because we're so new to it. We don't really have the language. You know, we're still in that transition of time before we become, you know, kind of second nature kind of thing, where we can talk openly about these things. And again, we are kind of neglected by the system and society. Dads are pretty overlooked by society as well. We're kind of seen as the inept ones, and not really, and which is fine. It's how it is. We're the Homer Simpson, but I do think that holds us back from really making an amazing contribution to this world. And I think that the amazing contribution will definitely come, but you know, these negative tropes, while they're funny, they don't really help.